Caught my cheating wife at a secret hotel. My wife was surprised when I gave her divorce papers in the hotel lobby. In the midst of a seemingly ordinary marriage, everything I knew about my life unraveled in an unexpected and shocking turn of events. This is the story of how my world came crashing down and, paradoxically, how it led to my eventual rebirth, a story of betrayal, love lost, and the harsh truth that letting go was the only way to reclaim myself. Sit back, as I take you on a journey that not only shattered my marriage but also taught me profound lessons about relationships, resilience, and self-worth. Our marriage had not always been perfect, in fact, no marriage is. 16 years of commitment had seen its fair share of ups and downs. My wife and I were young when we got married, brimming with love but somewhat lacking in the maturity needed for such a lifelong commitment. Over the years, we overcame obstacles, learned to understand each other, and, most importantly, built a family. We had 2 beautiful children, a 14-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. Life, from the outside, seemed picturesque. Our careers were flourishing as well. I had been working as an engineer for several years, and my wife was thriving as a manager at a large advertising agency. We provided well for our children, ensuring they grew up in a home filled with warmth, adventure, and, until recently, what I thought was love. But the illusion that our life was perfect started to crumble right in front of my eyes. The cracks that had been there for a while were just waiting for me to finally notice. It started gradually, like a subtle shift in the air. My wife was different, she was distant, distracted, and the warmth that used to be her default tone when she spoke to me had long since turned cold. She began speaking highly of her boss, contrasting everything I did to him. She praised his romantic gestures towards his wife while criticizing my lack of initiative. I made attempts to rekindle our relationship, taking her on dates, buying books on relationships, asking her how I could be better for us, but every gesture was greeted with a half-hearted, thanks, or outright disappointment. She used to say, "You need to already know what I want and do it without me having to tell you." The more I tried, the more I realized I was losing a game whose rules I never understood. It was like trying to fight against a tide that had already swept me too far away from the shore. One night, as she sat beside me in bed, I caught her smiling at her phone, a smile I hadn't seen her give me in years. I leaned closer, curious about the source of her joy, and she reacted violently, pushing me away with a furious glare. She snapped at me, demanding to know why I was looking. She stormed off to the bathroom, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, knowing deep down that something was wrong. The next day, I confronted her, asking if she was seeing someone else. She denied it vehemently, her anger boiling over at my accusation. But her reaction spoke louder than her words. She refused to let me see her phone. And when she eventually did, it was wiped clean of any meaningful conversations. I could sense the gaps, the missing parts of our life together, and the growing distance between us. It took weeks of quiet desperation and determination. But eventually, I gathered the evidence I needed. I asked a friend for help, someone with enough technical knowledge to recover deleted texts from her phone. The truth I uncovered hit me like a freight train. She was having an affair, and not just any affair, but one with her boss, the man she had been comparing me to for so long. My entire world shattered. Everything I believed about my marriage, my life, and my family felt like a lie. I reached out to her boss's wife, and together, we shared our heartbreak. She was as devastated as I was, and we decided to join forces, not for revenge, but for truth. We wanted to confirm what we already knew, to see for ourselves the extent of the betrayal. She confronted her husband, and I, in my own way, confronted my wife. It all came to a head one Saturday afternoon. My wife told me she had to go to work for an emergency, and that I shouldn't wait up for her. But something in my gut told me to check. I called the office, no answer. It wasn't even open on weekends. I tried her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. When she finally came home in the early hours of the morning, she was evasive, telling me I had no reason to worry and that I was overreacting. I knew I couldn't keep living this way. I had to make a decision, not just for myself but for my children. I needed to show them that self-respect was not negotiable. I met her at a hotel where I knew she would be meeting him. And with a heavy heart, I handed her the divorce papers in the lobby. The shock on her face was both painful and liberating. She tried to drag me aside, tried to explain, but I didn't want to hear it. I walked away, knowing that the marriage we had was over. In the aftermath, life was messy. My wife begged for another chance, insisted she wanted to make things right, even suggested therapy. I went through the motions, partly because I wanted to believe there was still something worth saving, and partly because I wanted my children to have their family back. But the more I tried, the more I realized that I was doing it out of fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of the unknown. Her efforts to win me back became desperate. She wanted me to sleep with her again. She wanted to show me that she was still the woman I had married. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal. All I could feel was the pain of knowing that she had given herself to someone else while I was at home, trying my best to be the husband she needed. The only solace I found was in the unexpected friendship I formed with her boss's wife. She was going through the same pain, the same heartbreak, and together we found a way to heal. What started as a friendship built on shared pain eventually grew into something more. It wasn't planned, and it certainly wasn't conventional, but it felt right. We supported each other through the darkest days, and in time, we found happiness together. It wasn't easy. Blending two broken families never is. Our children struggled to understand what was happening. My daughter, in particular, found it hard to accept my new relationship. She was angry, confused, and I could see the pain in her eyes every time she looked at me. I knew that, in her mind, I was replacing her mother, that I was betraying the family she had always known. It took months of therapy, long conversations, and endless patience to help her see that this wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about finding happiness again, about moving forward. There were days when I doubted myself, days when I wondered if I was making the right choices, if I was doing right by my children. But every time I looked back at the life I had left behind, I knew I had made the right decision. My wife had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. I chose to let go of the past, to let go of the pain, and to embrace the possibility of a new beginning. In the end, this story is not about infidelity. It's not about the betrayal or the heartbreak. It's about learning to let go of the things that no longer serve you, about finding the strength to walk away from a life that is hurting you, and about understanding that sometimes, the only way to truly love yourself is to let go of the people who don't. Jealous ex claimed I was cheating and faked a pregnancy to trap me. But it turns out that she was actually the one cheating and the baby wasn't mine. When I look back at my relationship with Sarah, it feels like a surreal story that could easily be mistaken for a drama series rather than my actual life. It was the kind of experience that shakes your faith in people and forces you to confront your weaknesses, insecurities, and fears. My story with Sarah started like a dream, but quickly unraveled into a nightmare I could have never imagined. It taught me more about love, manipulation, and the importance of knowing oneself than I ever thought possible. I met Sarah at a mutual friend's party. I still remember how she laughed at a silly joke I made. Her eyes bright and sparkling. She seemed carefree, radiant, someone who could lift the weight off a hard day just by being around. We started talking, discovered that we had a lot in common, and before we knew it, one date led to another, and soon, we were inseparable. Our first year together was pure bliss. It felt like we were living in a world of our own. We bonded over spontaneous road trips, late-night talks, and lazy weekends binge-watching shows together. I even introduced her to my family, who adored her, and she did the same with hers. We talked about our future together, and it felt so secure, so perfect. We were both ambitious in our respective fields. I was a software engineer, and Sarah was a graphic designer, and we had dreams of building something great, both in our professional and personal lives. But soon, the magic started fading. It started with little things that didn't seem too important at first. Sarah began questioning the amount of time I spent at work. Being in the tech industry meant my hours were unpredictable, and sometimes I had to pull late nights to finish projects. Sarah used to say she understood, but over time, her understanding turned into irritation. "Do you really need to stay that late again?" she would ask. Her voice tinged with suspicion. She started wanting to know where I was all the time, who I was with, and why I was talking to female friends. Initially, I thought this was a phase, maybe she just needed some reassurance. So, I brushed it off, thinking that every couple goes through moments of insecurity. But But the intensity of her suspicion grew. I remember vividly one particular incident when I went out for dinner with my best friend, Mike, and his girlfriend. Sarah couldn't make it because of work, but she called me in tears later that night, accusing me of lying about where I was. She had seen a Snapchat story from a mutual friend who happened to be at the same restaurant. And in her mind, I had betrayed her. It took me hours to calm her down and reassure her that I wasn't hiding anything. It was exhausting. The constant need to prove my loyalty, the unending accusations, and the scrutiny of every aspect of my life wore me down. Sarah would show up at my office unannounced, sometimes catching me off guard during stressful moments. One night, during an important presentation with my coworker Emily, Sarah barged into the room, screaming and accusing Emily of trying to steal me away. I will never forget the look of shock on Emily's face. It was a turning point, not just for my relationship, but for my professional life as well. My boss called me in the next day, trying to be understanding, but it was clear that this kind of drama couldn't happen again if I wanted to keep my job. I should have ended things then, but I didn't. Looking back, I think a part of me still held onto the person Sarah was in the beginning. I believed that if I just showed her enough love, enough reassurance, things would go back to how they were. I made excuses for her behavior, thinking that her jealousy was just a sign of how much she cared about me. I was wrong. I see that now. When I finally gathered the courage to end things, it wasn't pretty. I went to her apartment, determined to make her understand that the constant mistrust and accusations were too much to bear. The conversation quickly turned into shouting, with her accusing me of never loving her and using her all along. She even threw some of my belongings out of her window in a fit of rage. As I walked away that day, she screamed that she would ruin my life, but I dismissed it as just another emotional outburst. I was just relieved it was finally over. For weeks after, Sarah tried to contact me through texts, calls, even showing up at places she knew I would be. I blocked her everywhere, determined to move on, and for a while, I started to feel like myself again. I reconnected with friends, focused on work, and hit the gym more regularly. It was like I was reclaiming my life, piece by piece. But then, just when I thought I was finally free, she showed up at my door one Friday night. She looked disheveled, her eyes swollen from crying. Before I could ask her what she was doing there, she blurted out, "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know how to react. She showed me a positive pregnancy test, and suddenly, everything I had tried so hard to escape came crashing back. She said she had taken a home test and confirmed it with a doctor. I offered her a glass of water, needing time to process everything. But when I returned from the kitchen, I caught her going through my phone. She tried to play it off, saying she was just checking the time. But it was the same old breach of trust, the same paranoia. I told her I couldn't just take her word for it. I needed proof, a paternity test, before I could even begin to wrap my head around what she was telling me. Sarah was furious, accusing me of not believing her and abandoning her in her time of need. But I stood my ground. I knew I had to protect myself. For days, I was a wreck. What if she really was pregnant? What if I was about to become a father? The thought terrified me. I reached out to my parents and my best friend, Mike, who all supported my decision to ask for proof. They reminded me of how toxic my relationship with Sarah had been and told me that bringing a child into this chaos without certainty would only make things worse. A week later, Sarah contacted me, agreeing to the paternity test. We met at a local coffee shop to discuss things civilly. She apologized for her behavior, admitting that her initial reaction had been misguided. She even acknowledged that her trust issues had damaged our relationship, and she was willing to provide medical proof of the pregnancy. For a moment, I thought maybe things could at least end on a peaceful note. Then, a few weeks later, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was a man named Robert, and what he told me left me feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. He said he had been involved with Sarah during the time she claimed to be pregnant with my child. The baby wasn't mine, it was his. He apologized, saying he felt I deserved to know the truth. I thanked him for his honesty, though inside, I was boiling with anger and disbelief. How could Sarah have done this to me? How could I have been so blind? I confronted Sarah again, this time with Robert's revelation. She broke down, crying and apologizing, saying she had been scared and unsure of what to do. She had wanted me to take responsibility because she knew I was stable. that I would provide for her and the baby. But the trust between us was shattered beyond repair. I told her I never wanted to see her again and that she needed to get help. I was done. In the weeks that followed, I started picking up the pieces of my life once more. I resumed hobbies I had abandoned during my relationship with Sarah, like running and reading. I threw myself into work. And soon enough, my boss noticed. He hinted at a possible promotion if I continued my performance. It felt good to have something positive to focus on again. And then there was Emily. Emily and I had always gotten along well as colleagues. But after everything that had happened, we found ourselves spending more time together. It wasn't planned, but there was an undeniable connection between us. She had seen the worst of what I went through with Sarah, and yet she remained supportive and understanding. Eventually, we decided to address the situation openly, choosing to explore a relationship while keeping our professional lives separate. It was new, exciting, and nothing like what I had experienced before. With Emily, I didn't feel the weight of suspicion or fear, just ease and happiness. One day, Robert reached out to me again. He told me that Sarah had been going through intensive therapy and had recently found out she was pregnant again, this time with his child. He said that Sarah wanted to apologize to me in person. At first, I wanted nothing to do with it. Why should I? But after a lot of thought and discussions with my therapist, I decided to meet her. Maybe it was closure, or maybe it was the hope that hearing her apology would help me move forward. We met at the same coffee shop where she had once shown me the ultrasound picture. This time, Sarah looked different, not just physically, but in her demeanor. She seemed broken, vulnerable, and genuinely regretful. She explained that she had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and while it didn't excuse her actions, it helped explain some of the extreme behavior she had exhibited. She apologized, not just for the cheating and manipulation, but for everything she had put me through. Hearing her out, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and maybe even a little bit of pity. I told her that while I could appreciate her apology, I wasn't ready to forgive her. At least not yet. The wounds were still too raw. She nodded, understanding, and wished me well, and that was it. She walked away, and I felt an enormous weight lift off my shoulders. Reflecting on everything, I've learned some important lessons. Trust is the foundation of any healthy relationship, and once it's broken, it's incredibly hard to rebuild. If someone reveals their true nature, believe them the first time. I stayed with Sarah for far longer than I should have, partly out of fear of being alone and partly because I believed I could help her change. But in the end, the person who needed to change was me. I needed to value myself enough to walk away from a toxic situation. Now, as I move forward, I'm focusing on myself and my happiness. My relationship with Emily is growing at its own pace, and for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future. Work is going well, and I've even been promoted to lead my own team on a major project. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and that's enough for me. To anyone who might be going through something similar, know this: you deserve to be with someone who trusts you, respects you, and brings out the best in you. Don't stay in a relationship where you're constantly questioning yourself or your partner. And most importantly, trust yourself. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Thank you for being part of this journey. Here's to new beginnings, hard-earned wisdom, and the endless possibilities that lie ahead.